Are you ready? Okay. Hi, I'm Leslie Kirby. I'm the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have as our guest today Dr. Blake Wintory, Director of Preservation at the Heritage Foundation of Williamson County, and Mrs. Georgia Harris, who's an alumna of one of the Rosenwald schools. And that's our topic for today, is talking about the Rosenwald school that was built in Williamson County. And to kick things off, I'm going to have them introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about the schools. And then there's a movie about Rosenwald schools. We're going to show a video clip of the movie and then dive more into our questions. So just to kick things off a little bit, Dr. Wintory, would you like to say hello to everyone, introduce yourself, and talk a little bit about how you came to be part of this project?
So I'm Blake Wintory, and I'm the Director of Preservation at the Heritage Foundation of Williamson County.
And I've been here about 2 years. And so this project, the Heritage Foundation, got started just a little bit before I came on. So Georgia's been, she's been on a little longer than I have, a lot longer than I have actually. But the Heritage Foundation purchased a Rosenwald school, and it's really the last Rosenwald school in Williamson County. There were 4, and Lee Buckner is the last one. And it was built in 1927, and it operated as a school until 1965. And we have done a lot of oral histories, including with Georgia and others, to help document the history of the schools. And we've, me and some other people on the Heritage Foundation have done lots of other research tracing the school's history back even further before it was a Rosenwald. Do we need to?
Sorry to interrupt you. We're getting some feedback. Do you have 2 devices open? I'm sorry.
We do. I could have Georgia mute.
Hers is muted, which is why I thought maybe there's something else on.
Oh gosh. Well, it's got to be hers.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, no, we're not hearing you. I'm sorry.
He's on mute.
Okay,
Okay, now I'm unmuted.
Okay, you're good.
But what about Georgia? Is it still doing feedback?
It is. There's like an echo. It's weird.
I could go into a different room. Would that be better?
We could try that.
Well, let me.
In the meantime, maybe while you're shifting, Michal, why don't you go ahead and show the video?
Zoom.
Rosenwald became partners with Richard Sears in 1895.
Sears was what you could call a swashbuckling salesman. He would sell things he didn't have. He would sell things he didn't even understand. What he enjoyed was the selling. Under Rosenwald's leadership, Sears Roebuck became the largest retailer in the country.
Julius Rosenwald had 2 personalities. He was a tough businessman. And then, of course, this other side, the civil rights champion, somebody who really saw the disgrace in this country of African Americans being treated so poorly.
Education was seen as a dangerous thing, and white Southerners wanted to keep it out of black people's hands. Rosenwald was clearly affected by the Jewish belief in tzedakah. Giving charity was justice and righteousness. It was a fundamental commandment.
It's a wonderful story of cooperation between this philanthropist who did not have to care about Black people, but who did, and who expended his considerable wealth in ensuring that they got their fair shake in America. Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington combined with this plan for building Black schools. They are engaging in a radical experiment. It's a wonder they were able to achieve it, but achieve it they did. And in the end, 5,000 plus schools are built all over the South.
Julius Rosenwald created Black schools throughout the South. Without that initiative, we would have had a different America.
There was a little school a short distance from our home, walking distance. Beautiful little building. It was a Rosenwald school. It was the only school we had.
I thought my school was grand. It was the Lafayette County Training School, so there.
The Rosenwald Fund was the single most important funding agency for African American culture in the 20th century.
If you look at the list of people who receive money from the Rosenwald Fund, it's literally a who's who of Black America.
In the Jewish tradition, we talk about righteous action, this notion of tikkun olam. You do work on repairing the world.
All right, thanks, Michal. Hopefully we've got our tech issues figured out. So I'm gonna just start off talking with the two of you a little bit about the history of the Rosenwald schools in general and of the particular one, Lee Buckner, that Mrs. Harris attended. So what led to the particular sites that were chosen? Do you know the process by which they decided where to put particular schools?
Well, there was an application process. So, the program got started like in 1912, but by 1917, it got started in 1912 in Tuskegee Institute. And in 1917, the Rosenwald Fund was created and headquartered in Nashville, and they had an application process. And so they partially funded the creation of schools. And so they had these buildings, once they were built, had to be inspected. Before that, they had to make sure the sites met the specifications. They had to be at least 2 acres. And they also required, county and local school districts to own these sites. So they wanted buy-in from the local communities and local school districts to invest in African American education, especially during a time in which they had not been investing. The school facilities were markedly inferior to the white schools during this time period.
So the districts had to own the land, and then Rosenwald built the schools.
Yeah, well, kind of. So there was an application process. So Rosenwald, like for Lee Buckner, provided about $400 for the construction of the school. And they also required that the African American community contribute money. I think for Lee Buckner, it was around $700. And they also required the white community to contribute money. So they were trying to get local buy-in.
Right.
In some ways, that was, for the African American community, it was a double taxation because they were paying their citizens, their counties and communities, and they were paying taxes that way, but then they were required to pay even more money to have these schools built.
Yeah. And then once the schools were built, were they public or private? So who was covering the operating costs?
Yeah, well, they were public schools. So it was the county, at least for Williamson County, it's a county school district that is covering the costs. But once the schools are built, they were inspected to make sure they met the specifications of the Rosenwald plans. They were required to have new equipment in them, required to be painted a certain way, required to be built a certain way. So they were very modern schoolhouses for the time period, and they were model rural schoolhouses. This was primarily a rural initiative.
And then, since they were public schools, were students zoned for them, or was it a choice to attend the schools?
No, so they were public schools. So Lee Buckner was a school before it was a Rosenwald school. We can date the school all the way back to Reconstruction. So this was a local school district. There was probably some flexibility. I know it was in Williamson County, but we do know from some records that that some students from Murray County were attending there as well. So I'm sure that the rules are much more flexible back then than they are now. But one more thing about Rosenwald schools is that, you know, beginning around 1921, the fund started publishing these rural school plans or community school plans that gave you options for what you would construct, you know, a 1-teacher schoolhouse, a 2-teacher, a 3-teacher, a 4-teacher schoolhouse. And these schools had a certain look to them. They were built to face north or south, east or west, so they could receive directional sunlight. They usually had a battery of windows on one side. So Lee Buckner had a battery of several windows on the east side that received sunlight. They required to have certain kinds of ventilation. They were required to have privies, so there was a sanitation component. So you know, they really raised the standards of education in the rural South, especially for African Americans. But they also, these plans were so advanced, so progressive that the school districts, when they built white schools, would borrow these plans and build a school for white children using Rosenwald plans. So there's lots of examples of that. So like one of the schools at Nolensville, also Williamson County, is a white school, but it was built from Rosenwald plans.
You said that Lee Buckner was open from 1927 to 1965. Did it close because of integration, or what caused the school to close?
Basically, beginning in the 1950s, Williamson County started to consolidate schools. You know, it was still segregated at that point, but they started to consolidate. And so Lee Buckner consolidated a couple of other African-American schools in the mid-1950s. And then in 65, they had planned to consolidate Lee Buckner and 2 other African-American schools in the area into a new facility. But they were also trying to circumvent integration. But ultimately was closed. It was closed for a combination of reasons, both integration and consolidation.
Are any of the former Rosenwald school buildings still in use in Tennessee? Do you know?
I know of a couple. I think in the Cairo School in Sumner County is a community center. So I know some have been restored as community centers. There's several that are homes. You know, Lee Buckner was used as a home from the 1960s and 70s through the early 2000s. And so a real good source on that is the Tennessee Division of Archaeology. The past 10 years or so has done a survey of every Rosenwald built in Tennessee. There were over 350 built in Tennessee. They've gone to all the sites throughout the state, trying to find if the structure is still there. And they've not published their report yet, but they should be coming out pretty soon. And another source is the Rosenwald Foundation was based in Nashville, so their records are at Fisk University, and Fisk runs a database that you can look up the records of the schools built by county. So I think it's rosenwald.fisk.edu. It's a good source.
That's great. Can you use that database for schools in the other part of the country as well, or is it just Tennessee?
Oh, no, all,
so all
13 or so
plus
states that they built, yeah.
All right. Who was Lee Buckner and how did this particular school get that name?
So Lee Buckner is actually, it's a hyphenation. And so this is something we've thought a lot about. So the history of the school, I told you, it goes back to Reconstruction. And in 1868, it was called Rural Hill. And it was a church and a school. It was a Methodist church, a Northern Methodist church and a school. And the deed that we have found for that school is deeded over to one man named Anderson Lee, and he was a former slave. And fast forward to the next generation, his son Monroe Lee and his wife Frances Lee are the ones who sold the land for the construction of the Rosenwald School of Lee Buckner. So there's this connection from slavery all the way to the 1920s in Rosenwald with the Black Lee family. And we know that Lee Buckner is called Lee Buckner or called Lee School as early as like 1908. And There's also a White Lee family in the area. So I'm not sure if that Lee is referring to the White family or the Black family. It's not exactly clear. The White family has a story that they gave money and land to help construct the Rosenwald School, but that isn't, I mean, they may have given some money, but anyway, we can't find records on that exactly. But so I'm not sure if it refers to the White family or the Black family, but it certainly refers to one of them. And then Buckner is another large landholder in the area. His name was James Buckner, Jim Buckner. He was originally from Nashville. And I don't know if it's named for him because he had farmland that was close to it, or if he was just prominent in the area. I think by 1910, there was already a couple of roads named after him. So it may just be kind of a geographic naming thing going on there with the Buckner part.
All right. And what are your plans? So I know there's a plan to maybe renovate this particular school. So what are your plans going forward?
So when the Heritage Foundation acquired the structure, it was kind of a move it or lose it kind of situation. It was going to be torn down essentially. So we purchased it with the idea that we're going to move it to downtown Franklin, to our Franklin Grove campus, and we're going to have it restored to tell the story of the school and the story of being a Rosenwald. And the Heritage Foundation has had something called the Heritage Classroom for a long time. So this will be part of our Heritage Classroom initiative.
All right. I have a few questions for Mrs. Harris now. We can't unmute her though on our end, I don't think, because you muted
Okay,
her
let me go in there
computer.
and do that.
Yeah.
I'll take off my earbuds.
All right. And while he's transitioning, I want to pause briefly and just thank Celia Goldstein, who's on this call, for suggesting this program to us. I didn't know anything about the Rosenwald schools until Celia started talking to us about it and the efforts to move and restore the school. So thank you, Celia, for suggesting this program. It's really interesting so far.
Thank you.
All right. Mrs. Harris, thank you for joining us today. This is Mrs. Harris's very first Zoom call, everyone. So she's a little nervous, so be friendly. Can you tell us what are some of your memories from attending Lee Buckner?
Well, I can remember when I started, I wasn't even in school. I was just going with my cousin. And the primary, I was in that primary class, and I remember the songs. We'd have devotion first in the morning, and the songs we sing, and we had to have a Bible verse to say, and I remember the games we played. Like little Sally Walker and sitting in the saucer, and Ring Around the Roses. And we just had, we didn't have playground, so you just played whatever, hopscotch with sticks. You put the sticks down instead of drawing on the ground. And you hop over the sticks and to pick it up on the way back, pick up one. And of course, that was Miss Brownlow when she was a Fuller. She married a Brownlow, and she loved music. And we always had music. She had an old upright piano that she played. And she'd have us marching around the room to the beat. And she loved classical music. And so even a little opera, Let's see what else I wrote down some things I gotta remember. But and we just kind of played together. You sit outside had some rocks in the yard, a big rock you sit on and just talk to each other. And we would share our lunch because we had brown bag lunch. And we swapped. And one lady, she didn't like one girl then, she didn't like the yolk in the egg. So I'd give her my yolk and she'd give me her white of the egg. Well, it was backwards, I think I said it backwards. But we just switched food, and we played tag, and it was really nice to think about it. But
How far did you live from the school?
About 10 minutes away. We had to walk past the church and up the hill, and the school was right there. Because when I started, we were in that church. And so I went to like the 3rd grade in that church. And then I moved away and went to, because I was living with my grandparents when I was going there. And then I went to live with my mother. And then when I came back, I was in the 7th grade, I think. And so I finished the 8th there. And then I went to Franklin Training School.
Did you know anything about Mr. Rosenwald and his involvement with the school that you went to?
I had never heard of him. The only time I had heard of it when Rick Warwick, he was asking, I was down here and he was talking to me about, he was trying to find a school, Rosenwald School. I said, what is that? And he told me who Rosenwald was. And I said, oh, I went to one of those schools.
That's great. When you went to Franklin Training School after, was that an integrated school?
No.
Not yet. Okay. Did you ever attend an integrated school?
No.
No. Do you, how do you feel like your school experience, other than the obvious, is different from when your children went to school?
Well, my children went to an all-black school when they started. But they started in 62 or something like that. My oldest one did. But they went about 3 years. I know my daughter, she went about 3 years, so they must have went about 5 years before it was integrated in 1965, I think.
What are your goals going forward? So Dr. Wintory's talking about moving the school and restoring it. Is that something you feel like you'd want to be part of, or are you going to give tours, or?
Well, really, I am a part of it because they didn't know where Rosenwald School was. So I told Rick where it was, and he said, oh, so he went down and looked at it, and the next thing I know, they had bought it. And so that's how I got into this. Because I know quite a bit about it, and how the teachers were, and because it was a whole community school, and everybody in the school was kin in some kind of way. And so if anything went on at school, your parents is going to hear about it because you go to church on Sunday and they'll be talking about what happened. Tell the parents, or tell you about, well, they get it right. The parents would tell the children would tell the parents what their parents, what happened, and then it'd get relayed to your parents. So then you're in big trouble. But the teachers would also whip you with a switch.
Different times. Did you have different teachers for different subjects, or was it the same teacher who taught all the classes?
But the classes, after they build the school, the rooms were separate. So one teacher had maybe like from the primary to the 6th grade or 5th grade or something like that. And then the other teacher would have the other classes. So you'd have your class, and then she'd assign you something to be working on while she go to the next class. So you get to hear from all the classes what's being taught, which was interesting.
Right.
And,
what was your favorite subject?
spelling and arithmetic.
Mm. All right.
I also like history too.
So I'm going to ask the other people on the call now if they have questions for either of you. So I think we're a small enough group that we can just unmute. So if people have questions, go ahead and unmute and ask either Mrs. Harris or Dr. Wintory your questions.
You know, I'm gonna just make a comment. I love this conversation because coming from Chicago, Julius Rosenwald was just a hero to the Jewish community. This is a man who was born in the middle of the Civil War in Springfield, where Lincoln was elected president out of, and he made his money at Sears Roebuck. And we grew up knowing that he was one of the very, very first Chicago Jewish philanthropists. And he just believed that kids in the South in particular were getting a bad shake. And that's why he gave millions and millions to educate poor kids. And but he didn't stop there. He gave to, he was responsible for the Museum in Science and Industry in Chicago. I think he gave like 5 or 10 million to that. He was partly responsible for the Adler Planetarium. He was a man that believed in education. And but for a Jew born in the middle of the Civil War to accomplish what he did and then be committed to giving it almost all away. A tidbit is he got a scare in his life. We knew this. He actually thought his grandson, Leopold and Loeb, remember they did that thing with the kidnapping? He actually thought they were going after his grandson because of his wealth. And they were his grandson was classmates with the victim. And he put up money for the reward to solve the case. But he went down as a hero, a Reformed Jew that just founded synagogues and education. Just an incredible man. And to think that he died during the Depression and he gave his money away during the Depression. We grew up on his legacy. If you're a Chicago Jew, you grew up on the legacy of Julius.
Sorry.
Dr. Wintory, you're on mute.
How about now? So the Rosenwald Foundation was designed to exhaust its funds. So between 1917 and 1932, it folded after 1932. And so in that time period, they spent $4.2 million building over 5,000 structures. So most of those were schoolhouses, but they also built teachers' homes and shops. So like at the Franklin Training School or other training schools, like we heard Maya Angelou talk about earlier, they invested in industrial education, the trades. And so they built shops at places like that. But just, I was also going to comment on most of our students who went to school at Lee Buckner had never heard of Julius Rosenwald or did not realize that Rosenwald School. And probably one reason for that is that the fund exhausted its money in 1932, and they didn't start school until the mid 1940s or 1950s. So there's a little bit of distance. But we do have there's a pamphlet that was published in 1948 that looks at it's kind of like showcasing all the schools in Williamson County, and they also are showcasing the African American schools in the county. And there's an interior picture of the Westwood School, which is a Rosenwald design, but not a Rosenwald school. And in the background, you can see a portrait of Julius Rosenwald. So they were still remembering him into the late 1940s.
Do you know if he ever visited any of the schools that he built?
He did. He was on the board of trustees at Tuskegee Institute, where this project initially got started. And I know he visited some of the schools around in Alabama, and I'm sure there's other ones he visited also. There's a lot of stuff written on the Rosenwald schools, and the best book is Mary Hopshwelly's book, The Rosenwald Schools of the American South, and I'm sure she talks about it here. I know he did, but I couldn't tell you exactly where besides the ones in Alabama early in the project.
But he didn't come to Tennessee, you don't think?
I don't know. I suspect he did, since the foundation was based here. I know he was also a bit hands-off with the project. He hired really good people who ran it, and he didn't meddle too much in exactly what they were doing.
Probably smart. Judy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, did all the children in the community go to the school, or was there a selection process, or how did the children get chosen to go?
No, I just think it was a community school. It was if you were in the area, you went to you went to Lee Buckner. It was just a little rural school.
Yes. Yes, that's how it was. Some of them was in part of Murray County, but they walked to school. And so if you was able to get to the school, you went to that school. They didn't sign you in any school. Nobody was there to think about signing you this school or that school. It's just whatever area you lived in, that's where you went to school. And go ahead. You go
Were
ahead.
there other schools for Black children in that area, or was this it?
Well, in that area, I think the next school was in in Noble area, and it was some other little schools around. I can't think of what they were.
Well, there was Thompson Station.
Yeah,
that was fairly close. But so when we look at the school census records that we still have, all the kids, it shows how far they live from the school, and they all live within about 2.5 miles or less. So it was just like basically a walking distance. But I think about 3 or 4 miles north was Cedar Grove, I think.
Cedar Hill.
Cedar Hill, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, these rural schools were kind of spread out 5-10 miles from each other. I think in trying to remember my numbers. I think at one point there was over 20 African American schools in Williamson County.
And do you know how many were in Nashville?
How many Rosenwald schools?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's over a dozen, around a dozen.
Okay.
And 2 survive. But if you go to that Rosenwald database, you can look up Davidson County.
Right.
And I think that the school that Georgia went to in Nashville when she left Lee Buckner for a few years was also a Rosenwald.
Yes.
Really?
It was Rival, and then there was Rock City School, and then there was another little school I couldn't think of. It was kind of way up in the a road, and the teacher would pick me up in her car, and she'd pick up quite a few other children and take us to the school.
Are there other questions?
So I'll share actually something that's a little bit like Avi's reminiscence from his time in Chicago. My reminiscence is from my time in New Orleans, because Julius Rosenwald's daughter, Edith, married a figure in the New Orleans Jewish community named Edgar Stern. And then Edith and Edgar's son, after she had a second marriage, named Bill Hess, was and still is a lay leader in the New Orleans Jewish community. And I worked with him and had actually a wonderful number of opportunities to hear him talk about his grandfather and the legacy that his grandfather left, and the philanthropic way in which the community's involvement in both the Jewish and the general community was very much a legacy of Julius Rosenwald, and that it was really important that it was taught to Edith, the daughter, and to Bill, the grandson. And the family legacy in its own way, while it doesn't have the enormous wealth of the time that Julius Rosenwald had established, it still is a remarkable philanthropic legacy.
So, Mrs. Harris, I know you said your children went to school around the time of integration. Do you have memories about that transition process? So they started in segregated schools and then moved to integrated schools. What was that like in terms of day-to-day life?
Well, it was different because we moved to Franklin. Before that, they went to Thompson Station. So we moved to Franklin in '64. And so they started that school in was Franklin Elementary. So it was different, but my kids, they just friendly kids, you know, they get along with anybody. So my daughter, she was the only Black girl in the room she was in, and my second son, I think he was maybe 2 in that room, and so and my oldest one, I think it was about the same. You know, there wasn't that many in this school. It was, I guess because in the area we lived in, so it wasn't that many Black children in their rooms. But my daughter, she talked so much to everybody in the room. The teacher had to put her side of her desk because she wouldn't stop talking. And so she had this little friend, and this little white girl, and they got to be good friends. And she wanted her to come spend the night with her, and she went. And so we didn't have a problem with it. It was, I guess it's the way we was raised. We were raised to not see color, you know, you don't see color, you just see people. So my kids didn't have any problem with that.
Right. So it sounds like it was less, it's my understanding that in Nashville around integration that there was, if not violence, then threats of violence. And so for some of the families, they feared for their children's safety going to the schools with the white children because of the parents being so upset about integration. So it sounds like you didn't have that experience at your kids' school in Franklin.
No, we didn't have that.
That's good.
I don't think anybody had that. I can't remember anybody talking about anything like that. Of course, it could have happened, you know, but
right.
But my kids always had white friends, you know, and just they don't, you know, kids don't really see color. They just see a boy or a girl.
No, we teach them the bad things. Are there other questions for either Dr. Wintory or Mrs. Harris? Celia?
A few questions. One is for Mrs. Harris or Georgia, however I should address you. When you
Just
think of your
Georgia.
experience, Georgia, okay, great. When you think of your experiences at the schools you went to, the Rosenwald schools, was there anything special about that maybe you would hope they would incorporate in more modern schools? Is there something missing in schools of today that you might know about for your children's experience or your grandchildren's experiences?
Well, one thing about the Rosenwald schools was that we always got the books that came from the white schools, the older books. They got the new books. We got their books whenever they got new books. And so you not learning the same thing because you like behind. And sometimes they were torn and sometimes they were good books. And it's a lot of things that they had in the white schools that they didn't have in our school, that the money to do things with.
So you're saying even in your school, even though it was still was not, your books didn't match the other ones, but
no.
But was there anything special about your teachers or the environment that made you feel special? Because I think I've read some things how you felt it was your home and very special. Was there anything that was particularly special about being there?
Well, it was more like it was homely, because the teachers knew your parents and your grandparents, in my case. And so, and if you've done something, that they're going to find out about it. And the teachers would tell you, sit down and talk to you, sometime like your parents did. And then they taught us the Bible. We had to learn Bible verses and not say the same one every day. And we learned the 10 Commandments and the 23rd Psalm and the Beatitudes. And I learned all of that about the Bible in school. Kids, they don't get that today,
No.
So and I think that's why some kids, well, kids today rather, is missing something. They took God out of school, and we had that. So the teachers will sit down and tell you about the life that's coming up. Like you need to get all the learning you can in grade school before you go to high school. Because if you don't get it, then you're not going to get it in high school because the teachers don't either take that time or they don't have that time or something that you come up missing something. And I believe that to be true. And she would get books from the library and bring out, because we didn't have a library, but she would go to the library and she'd bring out books, and sometime in the evening she would read to us stories, which was very nice, and she was a good reader, so she, like, you could see what's happening when she's reading. So I had good experience in the school, and I think most of us did, because we didn't know any different, That's what we had always went, and that's how we seen it. So it wasn't something that you think you're missing. So, but I enjoyed the school.
That's great. I have another question or so for whoever, for Blake or whoever as well. And one was, I know there's been legislation in the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate to preserve the Rosenwald schools and to honor Julius Rosenwald, perhaps with an area in the park. Are you familiar with that at all, Blake, or where it is in the process?
I
He
You
needs
want to go, Georgia?
You need
Georgia
to
might-
answer that. You know what's going on with it.
I didn't know if Georgia knew. I didn't know if you happened to know that. I read that not too long ago. So, but it was actually one of the people.
I think I've heard of it.
Uh-huh.
Honestly, I don't know where it is right now. But I can say that Rosenwald schools are considered endangered. The National Trust has, named them like one of the most endangered places in the United States. I think back in 2011. They estimate that maybe 10 to 12% survive. So 5,000 structures, 10 to 12% survive across the South, which may amount to about 500 structures survive. In Tennessee, of the 300, I think it's 73 structures that were built, I think it's about 17% survive. So slightly higher number, but that's not a lot. And a lot of them are in really bad shape. So they are definitely an endangered structure, but they tell an important story, so they should be saved. They didn't fix the racial problems and the inadequate funding of education for African Americans, but they tried to work within that system, and they also did challenge that racial ideology that underlied it.
And they also tell this beautiful story of a successful but fairly quiet Jewish man who just wanted to make a difference for poor kids, and Booker T. Washington, who he befriended after reading his works. And then have a partnership of an African American, a descendant of slaves, with a Jew that grew up in middle Illinois, which was not a progressive part of the state then. And they did such good things together. It's just a beautiful story. And it reminds us of relationships that we should be continuing today.
Well, growing up in the country and in school that I went to, and the people that lived around us in the country, we didn't see all of this prejudice and stuff. If somebody needed something, it didn't make any difference of what color you were. We could play with the white kids. They had a garden. You were welcome to go get what you want out of it. And there was my grandmother used to quilt, for people, and a lot of them was white. And if they came by our house and we was eating dinner, and they offer them dinner, they come in, they sit and eat with us. And the little church we had, sometimes you see them sitting in the back. So I didn't see all this prejudice until I got older and come to town. I think you don't see that much in the country. Back then, you didn't. I'm sure it was there, but you just didn't see it. But it was a lot different when I moved.
Celia, did you have another question?
Oh, let's see. I was wondering. I did have actually something else I was thinking about. I wonder how many more of the alumni of the schools are still, giving you guys some feedback. I don't know, Georgia, if you even keep up with anyone, or Blake, if you know of others who might be contributing to the story that you're going to have at the school. I think what I had read is that it's going to feature the story of the school, of the Rosenwald movement, and have other exhibits. So I guess you must be compiling other information. That, and also the other thought is, when do you think the school might actually be moved? That would be the other question.
Well, I don't have any idea when it would be moved, but I know there's other people that went to school that's interested in it. They were there when we did the filming of the school, and so I'm sure they was interested in it also. It's not a lot of us left, but this still quite a few that.
Yeah, we've done, I think, 6 or 7 oral histories with former students. So like George Bowman,
Roy Brown.
Yeah, Mr. Brown.
And the Bufords.
Yeah, the Bufords. I was trying to, yeah, Charles Buford and his sisters. Yeah, we've done quite a few oral histories, and we really do need to do more. When the school will be moved, so we're moving it to downtown Franklin, and Franklin has an historic overlay, so there's a lot of approvals we have to get from the city, and so anyway, that's taken a little bit longer than we expected. But we have this campus in downtown Franklin that used to be the O'Moore College of Design. It has 2 historic houses on it, but we intended to be part of that complex. But we're in the middle of master planning for all that, so it's I don't know exactly when we're hoping soon, but it may be a little longer than that.
Beautiful campus.
Was another part of
there.
that question?
No, that was good. That's a beautiful campus there, really. We did a booth there that, for Ravenwood High School, on an Israeli booth. And our daughter did one on her club at her school, which was about genocide prevention. And there was part of the International Festival in Franklin. So I remember it being a very, very pleasant setting. I don't know what it looks like now, but it's the old O'Moore College.
Yeah, it's about 5.5 acres, and it has 2 historic houses on there. One of them is partially antebellum, and one of them is like 1890s. Yeah, so it has a lot of open space.
Is it the case that this is just kind of bureaucracy that takes a while, or is there opposition from the city?
We have approval in concept to move the school, but it's in a historic overlay, so there's a lot of rules, and we need to do a master plan complete that they'll have to approve.
And once it's moved, your vision is that it would be open for tours and things like that?
Yes, yeah, we're going to have so actually the school has 2 parts to it. There's an addition that was added about 1948. We kind of envision that side to be kind of like interactive exhibits, and on the other side to be the recreated 1927 classroom, to have the old padded desks and the blackboards and the teacher's desk, and just have it kind of look like like it did when it was constructed.
All right, we're almost at time. Are there any final questions from other members of the call?
I did want to say one thing, though, that the legislation I read about, Steve Cohen was from Memphis, was one of the people who sponsored the legislation for Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools. And I think they updated it, was the 2019 bill, and I think I saw somewhere now it's the 2020. So I guess that means it didn't go anywhere, but it might give you funding. I don't know. And I know you'll be, looking for that down the line too from other sources.
Great. Amanda, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering what Ms. Harris would like to see presented in the school when it's finished and restored.
Oh, well, I would like to see it like it was, with the pot-bellied stove, and where the teacher's desk was, and the double seats we had. Sometimes 2 sit in one seat. There was no electricity at first. They had a lamp that was an oil lamp that hang from the ceiling. And I would just like to see it like it was, be very, very interesting to see that.
Hopefully that will be achieved. Any other last questions before we have to wrap things up? All right, thank you again, Mrs. Harris and Dr. Wintory, for joining us today, and Celia for suggesting the program to us. It's a fascinating kind of double story of attempts to deal with race issues in public education, and a wonderful story of a Jewish philanthropist that we can all aspire to not be in terms of wealth, probably most of us on this call, but in terms of doing good. So it's a very inspirational story all around. And thank you everyone for joining us again. This is our final Lunch and Learn of 2020. I know that not too many people are going to be sad to see 2020 ushered out. We will be back on January 8th, Deborah? Yes?
Right, we will.
January 8th.
We'll take a couple week vacation and resume on Friday, January 8th. Our guest for January 8th will be Mr. Stuart Clifton. He works with nonprofits to look at advocacy issues and legislative issues. He'll be presenting us with what he sees as upcoming bills for the 2021 Tennessee legislative session and what impact it may have for us in the Jewish community. So we look forward to seeing many of you on January 8th, and of course, wish everyone a very healthy Christmas and Hanukkah and whatever you all celebrate. Be healthy and stay well throughout.
Yes, definitely. So again, thanks to everyone for joining us today. Wonderful discussion. As Deborah said, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas to those who are celebrating that. And we hope to see all of you again on January 8th.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Deb and Les, thank you for these great calls.
Hey, thank you guys.